to jeopardize our way of life, even in America and the UK, we don't see, because essentially we're successfully thwarting these terror attacks. Can you tell me what you know about it's Iran's role as a global sponsor of terror?
I used to say, if I hear AI one more time, I'm going to lose it. But Monday.com is super easy.
Yeah, I mean, the British Prime Minister, as you say, is quite ambivalent about using any kind of force against this regime, and President Trump has criticized him as not being a very reliable and responsible partner, but he came out and he laid out that case. Very active in the UK, all over Europe, all over Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, Central Asia. It's literally global. I mean, the reach of the IRGC, the Quds Force, and these proxies has been quite extraordinary. And on American soil. I mean, the regime in Iran tried to kill the president of the United States twice. You know, they've gone after Iranian American dissidents, including Masih Alinejad, who I think you know, Coleman, who was living in Brooklyn. They've gone after former senior administration and military officials, and on and on and on. I mean, even at my organization at FDD, I mean, we've been sanctioned by Iran, threatened by Iran. We have 24/7 security. You know, we're a think tank. I mean, we're not exactly a formidable intelligence service or military. We're a group of people who are writing and opining and doing great podcasts. But the fact that the regime has set its sights on us tells you everything you need to know about how they operate and the level of conspiratorial paranoia. So they're dangerous, they're deadly. They've got really an almost 5-decade track record of killing people in major American cities, including just down the street from where I live in Maryland, where they went after a former member of the Shah's government and killed him on his driveway. It's the other thing I would add, actually, is just the central role of the Mossad, Israel's intelligence service, in thwarting those attacks. I mean, many of these attacks that have been thwarted have been a result of Mossad's capabilities in picking up evidence that the Iranians were moving ahead with attacks, and then working closely with the CIA, MI6, MI5, intelligence services everywhere from, Thailand to Argentina to other areas around the world in order to French intelligence. There's been a number of successful attacks there and thwarted attacks there. But Mossad has really played a role in saving many, many lives. But the regime in Iran has redoubled those efforts. And Coleman, I got to say, I'm worried, both personally and in general as an American, that we may see the Iranians try to activate cells here in America to go after their opponents.
Right. Okay, another angle on this is China. And I've heard Haviv Retzig-Gur and my friend Melissa Chen talk about how America's geopolitical competition with China is crucial to understanding Trump's thinking here. In as much as any of us can understand his mind, the argument goes something like, Trump and the U.S. security establishment are looking ahead to a possible confrontation with China, probably over Taiwan. And in the event that happens, China basically has Iran as a client. Economically, Iran is totally dependent on shipping its oil to China, and China is very involved in arming Iran with advanced weaponry. And that China would essentially use Iran to open up a Middle Eastern front and occupy America's attention so that we didn't have enough resources, or had fewer resources to challenge China in the Pacific. Do you think that that China is a big aspect of the calculus here from the American perspective?
I think it should be. I think it's severely weakening this key member of China's axis, which is really this sort of axis of China, Iran, Russia, North Korea, and what was Venezuela, would be a very important move for the United States. I think for China-Iran is a really key pillar of its Central Asian and Middle Eastern strategy, given the large size of Iran, its strategic position and population and resources. And so severely weakening or even bringing down the Islamic Republic would be a severe blow to the Chinese Communist Party. I think the Chinese certainly would love us to be stuck in another Middle Eastern quagmire. So if this doesn't go well, that'll only redound to Beijing's advantage. But if it goes well, then as I said, I think it really severely weakens China's role, at least its strategy in the Middle East. China's ambivalent too. I mean, China does not like the fact that Iran is now attacking its Gulf partners, right, on which it depends for much more of its oil and natural gas than it does Iran. So going after the Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis is not something the Chinese are too happy about, and they've actually expressed some concern in very diplomatic language, but they've been warning the Iranians to cut it out, stop attacking our key energy suppliers. I think the other thing that is useful, and again, I'm never sure how this plays, but how is Xi looking at, and Xi's generals, who, by the way, he's right now engaged in a massive purge of his military, and I think he's getting rid of the military generals who don't want to attack Taiwan quite yet. I think he's sweeping them all aside and putting in place those who absolutely are yes men and agree that 2027, 2028 is the year that they should move on Taiwan. But the question I would be, if I were Xi or I was a PLA military planner, is looking at how the United States is operating right now. I mean, the tremendous force that is being brought to bear, and also the incredibly close coordination between the United States and Israel. I think this is unprecedented. I can't think of an example in modern American history where we have been this closely coordinated with a peer ally that is operating not as a junior partner like the British did in World War II, but as a peer ally, where the Israeli Air Force was responsible for 50% of the strikes in the opening days of this war. And they were flying from 1,000 miles away while our guys were flying off carriers and from bases that were much closer. I think that kind of joint coordination, fusion of intelligence, operational planning and operational activity is really remarkable. Now, if we can then take that model, and I think the Pentagon has called Israel, quote, a model ally. If we can find other model allies in the Indo-Pacific, like Japan, like Taiwan, maybe like South Korea, maybe like others, and we can create that same level of operational integration where our allies can also fight with that level of competence and effectiveness, I think that acts as a serious deterrent against Xi as he thinks about a Taiwanese invasion, or it certainly just makes that assessment of an invasion much more costly.
Okay, let's talk about this from Iran's point of view. Obviously, it's we don't even know who Iran is right now in terms of who's actually calling.
Just in case you're wondering, not much commentary for me on this because I'm not an expert in this subject. So basically just streamed this live so I could learn it in real time with anyone that wants to watch. So I may drop some commentary if I have anything of value to add, but right now I'm trying to learn just as much as anything else. Then after this video, we will be breaking down some of the lies and the half-truths and the bullshit that Tucker Carlson has been spreading. So we'll watch this full conversation to learn in real time, and then we'll go into Tucker Carlson a little bit more in case you're wondering the schedule. Thank you.
Calling the shots. So much of Iran's leadership has been taken out. But from the point of view of whatever elements of the regime remain, I fear, from their point of view, this is a classic asymmetric war where for them, victory just means survival. Like any element of the regime survives, they declare victory. But for us, victory means successful regime change, which is really difficult to accomplish without troops on the ground. So, first of all, react to just that. Is this an asymmetric war in the way that I just described, or is there a version of victory that doesn't have to be regime change?
I think Trump has said that. Again, as I said, not in a very disciplined way, but he has said that. I mean, I don't think his mission here is regime change. I think if regime change occurs because Iranians take back their country, then great. You know, that's the grand slam. But I think his objective is to decimate the deadly capabilities of the regime. So the regime can survive, they can declare victory. I mean, this is what they tend to do. This is what Hezbollah does, Hamas does, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. I mean, the Houthis, this is what they've done, particularly to the Israelis for years. We survived, therefore we won. Well, you know, you can say you won, except you just lost your entire leadership. Your supreme leader got killed. The next guy got killed. Your military capabilities were decimated. The Navy is all at the bottom of the sea. Your missile factories are gone. Your missile launch.
Yeah, because these folks don't much care about quote unquote winning. Terrorists care about creating as much propaganda, destruction, and chaos as possible. And they don't care what people of their group die. That's why they have child soldiers, and that's why they use human shields. They just want to cause immense amount of chaos and do as much destruction as possible in the process.
Are gone, and your nuclear sites have been destroyed. Okay, you've survived, but you're no longer the dangerous enemy that you were just a few weeks or months ago. I think that's victory. And I think President Trump should take great pains to explain that and keep articulating that as his goal. And then to say, but of course, we would be delighted if Iranians took back their country. And I believe that at that point, the United States, in partnership with Israel, I hope other allies, should be doing everything possible to provide maximum support to the Iranian people. And that means many things we can talk about, but it also should include arming them so that they don't take to the streets unarmed like they did in January and get gunned down. And I think there's already some discussions and movement on that front. It should also include, obviously, communications devices and Starlink. So when the regime shuts down the internet, Iranians can still communicate and mobilize and protest. But it should also include really a campaign of maximum fracturing. I mean, it's amazing to me, Coleman, like our enemies are so unbelievably talented at identifying the fractures and fissures in American society and running constant, daily, hourly influence operations in order to expand the fractures and fissures within our society. And they're brilliant at it. I mean, if you look at Chinese, Russian, Iranian, and even Qatari active measures in America, I mean, I think you and I would agree that American democracy is less healthy than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And particularly in this kind of internet social media age, our enemies have been much more successful at running influence operations against us.
I remember there was just to double click on that. I remember there was a Black Lives Matter protest that was actually organized by Russia, and like they created a fake event, a fake Facebook page, and Americans actually showed up to it.
Yeah.
This is actually amazing. In these two comments that we have on YouTube, we only have 2 comments. They show the exact sort of polarization we have right now. First comment says, Tucker Carlson is one of the sane people in this country. That's not true. And then the next one says, Tucker Carlson should have his platform shut down. I don't think he should have his platform shut down, but I certainly don't think he's sane. I certainly think he's calculated in his measures, that he is manipulating, lying, and telling half-truths. But it's just interesting to see that in real time, that those are the 2 only comments we have on YouTube, and people have, totally different opinions. Let's continue. But the influence, he said, the influencer operations happening in America are very true. I mean, just there's the, kind of the point of that. But the influencer operations are really having a toll on the American people, our discernment, our way we receive information, the attention economy, all these sorts of things.
A couple years ago.
Listen, the Russians, the Soviets have been geniuses at that. I mean, back in the old days, right? The KGB was running active measures, running influence operations, coming up with conspiracy theories that the CIA had created AIDS. And, they were just geniuses at leveraging American society and the disagreements and the fractures that we had against us, and they're continuing to do that. Now, why are we not doing that against the Iranians? And I think we will, and I think we should, in a next phase of this, start to use influence operations to expand those fissures within the support base of the regime, which may be no more than 20% of Iranians. I think after the January slaughter is probably down to 15, 10%. And then what you do is you've got to separate the true believers from the charlatans. I think our friend Karim Sadjapur has put it very well. He said at the eve of the Islamic Revolution, maybe 80% of Iranians were true believers and 20% were crooks. And now 20% are true believers and 80% are crooks. Well, let's figure out how we can flip the charlatans and crooks against the true believers. Let's identify elements within the regular Iranian army, the Artesh, to see if there are army commanders who are willing, who are patriots, who are no longer willing to have guns turned on their own people, and try to maneuver them against elements of the hardcore IRGC. So I think there's a lot that can be done through maximum pressure, maximum support, maximum fracturing to extend the success of a military campaign, which is designed to degrade the deadly capabilities of the regime. I'll say one other quick thing. What the Israelis are doing right now is they're going after the repression apparatus. That's not what we're doing. They're doing that. They're going after many of the elements of the repression apparatus that were responsible for the brutal crackdown in January and have been responsible for previous crackdowns over the years. And they're taking out IRGC, Ministry of Intelligence, Basij, people responsible for the prison systems, the Ministry of Justice, which is not just, but brutally repressive. Like, if you can actually weaken that repression apparatus, then you increase the likelihood that Iranians have a fighting chance if they take to the streets. But I think those are all follow-on opportunities, and they're not guarantees. And a successful mission will be just to strip this regime of the deadly capabilities that it has to threaten Americans and our neighbors.
I think when we think about war as Americans, as Westerners, always our ideal, our paradigm case is World War II.
Right.
And why that matters is because with Japan and Germany, we had extremely powerful enemies that became friends and have not been a problem since. Like, not only have they not been a problem, they've been very important allies for like 80 years. And before that, they were just absolutely declared enemies. There was just like this night and day 180-degree switch that those regime changes enabled that make those wars and the cost of those wars and lives really tolerable in retrospect, even though it was tragic and terrible at the time. I mean, increasingly, it's hard it's hard to see how the scenarios and the wars that we enter.
I just don't think like people now compare this, going into Iran and starting a war with Iran. I don't think they compare it to World War II. I think they compare it to what we did in Iraq. And that's why most Americans have a hesitation about doing it, because of the faulty information, the fact that there was lies and there was no weapons of mass destruction and the whole thing was a disaster. That's what now people are, thinking that this is like. And so that's why there's a large hesitation to be attacking Iran. And of course, there's the Israel problem where, that. But anyways, let's continue.
Today really match that kind of framework. Like, is Venezuela going to go from like a threatening sworn enemy to our best friend overnight? I guess not. Probably not. Is Iran going to go from a sworn enemy to best friend overnight? Pretty unlikely. But it seems like rather than fixing a problem, this manages a problem. In other words, what you're talking about is like not regime change, it's lessening their capabilities. It's getting rid of their nuclear program. Will they build their nuclear program back? Well, unless we change the regime or the nature of the regime, they're likely to build all these capabilities back. And so what we're left with is a paradigm where instead of fighting one huge war that leads to regime change and leaves hundreds of thousands or millions dead, we fight a series of small wars, maybe once every 5 years, once every 10 years, much lower death counts. But each time we lessen their capabilities, we prevent them from becoming powerful enough to ever justify a huge long war. And we manage the problem. And maybe that's the best that can be done with these kinds of enemies in this kind of a world. Do you think that that's a realistic new status quo that we may fall into with Iran?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good thing to take a very powerful, deadly enemy and turn it into a weak enemy. It's a better thing to turn a weak enemy into a frenemy, right? I mean, I think Turkey today, for example, is a good example of kind of a frenemy. They're not quite ally, they're not quite enemy. We have common interests with them on certain things. We have very different interests on other things. We can sort of manage the relationship with Turkey, at least for now, even though they're a rising power in the Middle East, and that might change. It's obviously a great thing to take a frenemy and turn them into a friend. And that's what we did in World War II, as you say, with Japan and with Germany. I think the approach that we should take is we should strip dangerous enemies of deadly capabilities. We should do what's necessary to remove those capabilities and make sure that they can't reconstitute those capabilities. And then we should start to use all instruments of American power to fundamentally change regime behavior. And if history smiles on us, kind of the way it smiled on Ronald Reagan when he confronted the Soviet Union, bring down those regimes. I mean, even in the case of the Soviet Union, which I think is one of the best examples of successful regime change, right? I mean, it was Ronald Reagan. I mean, it was a decades-long strategy, but Reagan really came in 81 and ran a very successful maximum pressure campaign to put huge pressure on the Soviet Union, a maximum support campaign to provide support for anti-Soviet dissidents, a maximum fracturing campaign, which actually yielded a Gorbachev, who at the end of the day recognized, I better open up the economy and open up the national conversation and go through some restructuring here to save the Soviet Union. And that ultimately brought down the Soviet Union. Even though how successful that was, and we freed all of Eastern Europe, we got Putin. So we didn't get a free, democratic, and prosperous Russia, but we got a free, democratic, and prosperous Eastern Europe, and fundamentally changed the equation. And we no longer had a deadly superpower locked in mortal combat with us for decades. We had a less deadly, still dangerous, second-rate power out of Moscow that we've now had to deal with since Putin came into power. It's better. It's not great, but it's better. And I think that opportunity exists with Venezuela, because I think Venezuela, it's absolutely possible that we now have a government there who's just going to play ball with us and not engage in massive drug smuggling and not going to be playing footsie with the Chinese Communist Party or the Iranians or terrorist organizations. And that's better. And with the Islamic Republic of Iran, and if we can't get a free, democratic, and prosperous Iran, maybe we get a more pragmatic Iran that decides that they're not going to devote hundreds of billions of dollars to trying to destroy us and the Israelis and kill hundreds of thousands of people through the Middle East. They're going to focus on their own national interest, and then their national interest is not going to be about building nuclear weapons, ICBMs, and sponsoring terrorist organizations. That's better than what we have today. It's not as good as it would be if we have a free, democratic, and prosperous Iran, but I think that's really something up to the Iranian people with our support to bring about over time.
Okay, let's talk about the Israeli point of view here. Obviously, Iran is a graver threat to Israel than it is to America. However, you actually rank those threats in relative terms. Iran says we're the big Satan, they're the little Satan, but the little Satan is right next door to them and much smaller. And so from the Israeli point of view, Iran is really an existential threat, and um, and Trump, in his willingness to confront Iran, gives Israel a historic opportunity to deal with Iran, not from a defensive crouch, but at a strategic moment when Iran is weakened, when Israel has America's military at its side. And so all of that makes sense from the Israeli point of view. And yet you also have people in America on the right saying that we are fighting Israel's war. So how do you respond to that allegation? Is it that we just have similar objectives in this particular moment, or is it true that the tail is wagging the dog, as it were, that Trump has been either persuaded or some people conspiratorially believe blackmailed into fighting this war? How do you respond to that?
So I actually look at it the opposite of how you characterize it. I think Israel's given America an historic opportunity to finally deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran that's been at war with America for 47 years and has killed and maimed thousands of Americans. And where we have gone from the 79 hostage crisis, where we were humiliated under Carter, and they took our hostages and held them for 444 days, and we were feckless and unable to do anything. And then through the 1980s, even under Reagan, and the 90s and 2000s, I mean, this is a country, a revolutionary regime that's been at war with us. It has inflicted massive damage on America and American interests. And now the Israelis show up after October 7th, and they say, Matt, step aside. We got this. And they start systematically degrading and eviscerating Iran's tentacles, its proxy terror armies. And then the Iranians make the mistake of firing ballistic missiles at the Israelis in April of 2024 and then November of 2024. And the Israelis say, step aside, we got this. And they go in and they show how they're able to destroy Iranian air defenses. And then the Iranians continue to make mistakes by confronting the Israelis. And the Israelis say, America, step aside, we got this. And in the first 11 of the 12 days of the 12-day war in June, it is the Israelis who go in, and the Israeli Air Force, and they destroy Iran's air defenses. They open up the skies. They take out significant parts of Iran's nuclear program and missile program and leadership. And President Trump says, wow, that's impressive. The skies are open. There's no more risk to our B-2 bombers who've been training for decades for exactly the mission to destroy the Fordo deeply buried enrichment facility. And sure enough, B-2 bombers come, drop, 14 massive ordnance penetrators and destroy the Fordo enrichment facility. And no American is lost. All the pilots return home. And Trump declares, rightly so, a major American victory. Well, a major American victory brought to you by the Israeli Air Force, right? Which had done all the hard work in the previous 11 days. So I think in many ways, the Israelis have given us the opportunity to confront an enemy that had done so much damage to us and who we were not willing to confront. I mean, they bled us in Iraq. They bled us in Afghanistan, right? American presidents were not willing to give CENTCOM commanders the opportunity to hit back. And that's George W. Bush. I mean, that's Barack Obama, right? It's not a partisan issue. It's a bipartisan consensus that we were not willing to hit back against the Iranians because we were afraid of escalation with the Islamic Republic. Mm-hmm. And we always had this perception that they were very powerful and very deadly, and they were 10 feet tall. And after October 7th, this tiny country of 10 million people called Israel, with a small air force and a small intelligence community, demonstrates the United States of America, a military superpower, what they're capable of doing against our enemy. And then we recognize that, and now we are taking advantage of that in order to finally, if we can, strip this deadly enemy of the very capabilities that it has used to harm America and will harm America in the future. I think to those people, my only answer is, can I help you write your thank you cards? Because I'll translate them into Hebrew for you. I mean, they, but of course, I mean, Coleman, you know better than I do. They are itching. And the other thing I have to say, what I find amazing about the MAGA component of this is they're basically saying, we love you, President Trump. You are the greatest president since George Washington and the greatest commander in chief since Dwight Eisenhower. But you are taking direction from a foreign power to send Americans into war. Now, Coleman, I haven't looked up the legal definition of this, but I believe they're accusing President Trump of being a traitor.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how you square you're the greatest president ever and you're a major traitor to America. I find that an interesting and though awkward position for people like Tucker Carlson to be holding.
It's super awkward. And what makes it even more awkward is that whether you love Trump or hate Trump or are ambivalent about Trump, I think until 2 seconds ago, what we all agreed about Trump is that he is the first to fire someone who is telling him something he doesn't want to hear, right? In other words, not only was he famous for firing on The Apprentice, his first administration had incredibly high turnover rate of national security advisors and all kinds of aides and so forth. Because if you come to Trump and say, here, Mr. President, like, here's what I think you should, if you try to manipulate him, he'll say, screw you. He'll get sick of you in 6 months and he'll kick you to the curb. And that was one of my worries. It still is one of my worries about the second Trump admin, is that he's surrounding himself with yes men and yes women. The corollary of that, however, is that how is this guy going to get manipulated into doing anything he doesn't want to do for his own personal philosophy, his own personal interests, or what he thinks are the interests of the country? There's no way. I don't even think he can be manipulated into doing something by his national security advisor, much less the prime minister of another country. And everyone understood that. Some people love that about Trump. Some people hate that about Trump. But we kind of all agreed that that's true of Trump the man until 2 seconds ago, when that belief was put in direct contradiction with the basically Israel-obsessed wing of the right that has been arguing for 40 years that Israel controls Washington, D.C., regardless of what we do. So it is interesting to see that cognitive dissonance and how different people resolve it.
I mean, the great thing about being a conspiracy theorist is you don't necessarily have to reconcile inconsistencies. It really is a kind of a liberating intellectual position where you literally could take two contradictory positions, hold them at the same time, and not reconcile them. Donald Trump is the greatest. Donald Trump's a traitor. Donald Trump makes up his own mind. Donald Trump is being manipulated by Prime Minister Netanyahu. By the way, just today, it was interesting because a reporter asked Donald Trump if Prime Minister Netanyahu forced him into war with Iran. And I think he responded along the lines of, actually, I'm the one who pushed the Israelis to go. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, if he did or not, but it's interesting. I think the conspiracy theorists and the kind of anti-Israel zealots, who, by the way, are both on the right and left, I mean, let's be fair, are always looking for this sort of hidden hand of the Israelis and the Jews in Washington, and they've been doing it for so many years, and we've been hearing the same conspiracy theories and calumnies for years. It's just, I guess it's the nature of the beast. By the way, we're hearing this in the 30s, right? If you read the history, I mean, the Charles Lindberghs and Henry Fords of the world, who were also virulent anti-Semites, were constantly accusing FDR of being controlled by these Zionists and Jewish capitalists, and they were going to force America into war with the Nazis and the Japanese. And even today, you've got Tucker Carlson hosting these, quote, historians who say the grand villain of World War II was Winston Churchill, not Adolf Hitler, because Winston Churchill was the one who forced America into war on
Winston
behalf
Churchill
of,
installed by Zionists, quote unquote.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Winston Churchill installed by Zionists. So, the longest hatred never goes away, and the crazy conspiracy theories continue to um, infect the minds of otherwise one would hope sensible people. But I think it's clear to me. It's clear to me as an American that we have finally been given the opportunity, I think because of Israeli courage and bravery, to finally deal with a regime that has slaughtered so many of our young men and women over so many years, taken our diplomats hostage, killed them, our civilians. I mean, the things that it's done to the United States, finally the opportunity to seek justice. And nothing makes me happier than seeing the men that I've been following for years with American blood on their hands being eliminated by either the Israeli Air Force or even better, the American Air Force.
Yeah. Okay. So I saw some reporting recently that apparently, according to New York Times, other outlets, there was a CIA document that laid out 3 possible scenarios in Iran. One actually Trump referenced in his recent press conference. A reporter asked him, "What's the worst case scenario here?" And he says the worst case scenario is that we get rid of Khamenei and he gets replaced by someone even worse or just as bad, someone just as hardline, a Shia cleric. Scenario 2 is that there's a popular uprising, there's a revolution, there's regime change from within. Iran takes back its country. And apparently the CIA judged this to be a very low likelihood scenario. And I want to ask you about that because um, uh, if true, that's that's reason for, I suppose, pessimism in the long run, right? And then the third is that Iran sort of becomes like Pakistan, where the military, the less ideological factions within the military effectively control the country through a puppet leader. And we can sort of manage them. We can deal with them as a kind of frenemy, as you were earlier saying. Do you agree that these 3 scenarios are sort of the landscape of possible outcomes, and how likely do you judge each one to be?
Yeah, so the 3 scenarios are enemy, friend, frenemy, right? Enemy, we get another radical Islamic cleric. And by the way, I think we might, because I think it's entirely possible that Khamenei's son, Mushtaba, becomes the next supreme leader. And he's as big a psychopath as his father, maybe worse. And we'll see if he gets anointed, and if he does, we'll see if he survives, because he certainly is going to be high up on the at least the Israeli target list. But yes, I mean, it's entirely possible President Trump's right, and we do end up with a radical cleric and the IRGC still in control. But once again, stripped of their deadly capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Better scenario, not a great scenario. Second scenario.
Sorry, before you go,
yeah.
let me highlight something there. The fact that Trump openly acknowledged the worst case scenario, and in a way that almost struck me as flippant, I'm now realizing suggests that maybe he even views the worst case scenario as a worthwhile effort. In other words, okay, we get someone just as bad, but they're stripped of capabilities. That achieves my minimum bar of objective.
That's right. That's right. I mean, again, I've been on this for 22 years. Not my ideal scenario. We can talk about my ideal scenario. But yeah, I mean, if we get Mushtaba and the IRGC in a clerical military dictatorship, and they don't have nuclear weapons and 2,000, 3,000 ballistic missiles and hundreds of launchers, and they don't have an active ICBM program. And by the way, they're terrorist proxies, this kind of axis of resistance, or what I've often called the axis of misery, has been severely degraded. That's not bad for a few weeks' work. And that takes us to the second scenario, which is, of course, the one we all hope and pray for, which is a free and prosperous Iran. I don't know how to assess it. I don't know how the CIA is assessing the likelihood of that. I think it's always better to expect the worst and be surprised on the upside than maybe expect the best and be devastated on the downside. We're Americans. We're an optimistic people. We always try to expect the best, and then we get devastated on the downside when it turns out, particularly in the Middle East, that optimistic scenarios die in the sands of the Middle East. But I do think it's possible. And I think it's possible for a few reasons. One is, it's worth remembering that pre the horror of the Islamic Republic, that Iran had a tradition of constitutionalism, of representative democracy, um, of a parliament, and Iranians, as you know, because you, Coleman, you know many Iranians, right? The only place Iranians are not successful in the world is inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. Like wherever they go, they're unbelievably successful. America and Canada and Europe and Australia, wherever they go, they are prosperous and incredible immigrants who contribute so much to the countries in which they live. So imagine unlocking that potential of 92 million Iranians inside the country with their oil wealth, their natural gas wealth, their entrepreneurship, their geographical positioning, peace with Israel, the Cyrus Accords, peace with the Arabs, the extension of the Abraham Accords, and obviously huge investment coming from the United States and Europe and lifting of sanctions and everything that could actually happen that would make this an incredibly free, prosperous, and I think in a good way, quite a powerful regional actor and close ally of the United States. Now, that is the optimistic scenario. The third scenario, which is the Pakistan scenario, is the frenemy scenario. And that's where you don't get the radical clerics, you get the military dictatorship. And they're not allies. Like the Pakistanis are not enemies, but boy, are they a problematic country. I mean, have they caused enormous difficulties for the United States? But we don't classify them yet as an enemy, and they haven't threatened America directly. And we have to deal with this incredibly corrupt, in some cases quite Islamist military that is certainly not what Jinnah had hoped Pakistan would look like when he thought he would bring democracy and liberalism after the division of the subcontinent into India and Pakistan. Entirely possible we're heading in that direction. And I think in Trump's mind, that may also be a direction that he would consider to be a partial success, as long as, unlike Pakistan, this Iran didn't have nuclear weapons and long-range missiles to threaten its neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last question for you. Trump's first administration saw the Abraham Accords, this incredible victory that I certainly didn't expect, many people didn't expect. And it showed that there was an appetite in the Arab world for a thawing and a peace with Israel, given certain benefits, right? And it showed that the conservative Sunnis and Israel and America could partner against the radical Sunni and the radical Shia element and work on bolstering those shared interests and forging those shared interests into actual, like, normalized diplomatic relations. Since then, the major goal of that strategy has been to get Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords. And it's been argued that this was on the brink of happening when Hamas realized how terrible that would be for Hamas's interests and launched October 7th to interrupt that process, essentially. So in the past, 2-3 months, I've been seeing a lot of reporting suggesting that Saudi Arabia has now backed away from that posture. That their split with the UAE over Yemen has caused them to sort of recede from even the possibility of normalized relationships with Israel, even the possibility of joining the Abraham Accords, and taking a more antagonistic posture towards Israel. I'm curious, what does this Iran war now do to that status quo?
So I think a few things have happened. I mean, I think, first of all, I think that some of that was a bit overstated, not what you said, but the sort of analysis of where the Saudis were heading. I can tell you privately, the Saudis are in Washington reassuring everybody that they're absolutely committed to the Abraham Accords, to normalization, to what they call integration with Israel. And that this blow-up they were having with their Emirati brothers had nothing to do with Israel. It was everything to do with this sort of difference in concept that the Saudis had about how to bring normality and stabilization to conflict areas. And we can get into the details now on another podcast if you're interested. It's pretty fascinating why there was this sort of doctrinal difference and how it played out in Libya and Yemen and Sudan and Somalia, Somaliland and other places. All of that, by the way, has been put aside. I mean, there was this big break between MBS and MBZ, and now they've come together thanks to the fact that the Iranians have decided to attack both their countries, and it's really unified the GCC in the Gulf in the face of Iranian threats. The second is that I think that the level of military and intelligence integration between the United States and Israel that we talked about earlier, and by the way, the level of integration in air defenses that the United States has been leading through CENTCOM that has bound together the Israelis with the Saudis, Emiratis, Bahrainis, Jordanians, Egyptians, and others, that has been so successful in defending against Iranian attacks both last June and now, is another good reminder to the Saudis that integration in an American condominium is exactly what they need for their own preservation and self-defense. Because, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but the Chinese are not protecting the Saudis or the Emiratis or the Bahrainis. The Russians are not. No one else is protecting them. It's us. And it's our military equipment that is actually defending their cities. So I think they even more so now appreciate the importance of integration, and integration for the Saudis needs to be more than military and intel. For this to work, it needs to be political, diplomatic, and economic. And I think that provides good opportunity for restarting this process towards the Abraham Accords. The next factor is, look, President Trump wants it. I mean, this for him is like crowning glory of his 2 terms. And I find it difficult to believe that MBS will say no to President Trump when President Trump, maybe after this war, comes directly to him and says, all right, my brother, look what I've done for you.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you're going to do for me. The final factor is the Israeli domestic political scene. I think MBS would prefer not to stand on the White House South Lawn and shake hands with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Right.
I think he would prefer a different Israeli prime minister. So he's waiting for the next Israeli election. If he gets a new Israeli prime minister, it's politically easier for him. If he gets Netanyahu again, well, he'll have to just deal with that reality. And I think the final factor is, the Israelis have already signed on to what MBS demanded, which is they signed on to the 20-point plan, Trump's 20-point plan in the peace board, which says explicitly in the concluding paragraphs about the importance of a pathway to Palestinian sovereignty and a commitment of all the parties to do so. Well, Netanyahu signed on to the 20-point plan. He can pretend he didn't or not those paragraphs, but he has. President Trump can hold him accountable for that. And I think that provides the political space for the Saudis to return to those discussions, which, as you rightly note, we were like weeks away from signing that normalization deal until Iran realized this was not in its interest and Hamas attacked.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll let you go there. May have to get you back on again. I really encourage people to follow you for analysis of the situation. Mark Dubowitz, thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Coleman, great honor. Thank you, sir.
All right. Very good. Very good. I enjoyed that conversation. Didn't have much to add in terms of commentary because I'm just trying to learn in real time. And so I very much appreciate Coleman Hughes. His debate with Dave Smith was one of the best I've ever seen. That was a good, informative conversation. Now I want to look at this article that was posted on X about Tucker Carlson and the lies he spews and the dangerous rhetoric he's been spreading and how it actually may cause harm to Americans. So let's look at that, and we'll share that right now. All right. So the first thing is, this is kind of Tucker Carlson's MO, right? Tucker is too smart. Now, I'm not going to read this whole article to you. It's way too long. It would take way too long. But maybe we'll hit on some high points about the article. You can find it on X from Insurrection Barbie. But Tucker is too smart to make things up wholesale, right? He just doesn't do that. He's too smart. His technique, kind of like Candace, is more sophisticated and more dangerous. He does select real facts, then soldiers like fake conclusions onto them, so seamlessly the audience carries the lie home, believing they heard the truth. For example, on March 4th, he did this 6 times in a single broadcast. So here is a fact. Some IDF soldiers have been photographed wearing Third Temple patches on their uniforms. True, they exist. They are real. So Tucker then comes to this broad conclusion. That means obviously the Israeli government's war aim is to demolish the mosque and build the Third Temple funded by American taxpayers. But what he didn't tell you is the IDF chief of staff banned those patches in October 2024. They're unauthorized Velcro moral stickers sold by private activist groups for a few dollars each, the same category as a soldier putting a ban sticker on his helmet. By Tucker's logic, every army that has ever had a soldier with an unauthorized item in his kit is officially endorsing whatever that item says. The patches are real. His conclusion is fabricated and lied. And I think that's really important to understand what he's doing and how he is doing it. So let's look at some other stuff potentially in this. His most recent one is the Chabad fabrication. This is ridiculous. I just don't understand where it comes from and how he now assumes that Chabad is somehow responsible for the war and that this is like a whole religious war. And he just kind of tells half truths and makes up the half truths from there and then sends you home with like this whole thing that you should believe. And it's all based on the Jews in Israel. But he says it under the guise of like trying to be kind and nice. But there's some good people in there. And I'm just wondering and asking questions. But I'm telling you half truths and lies and fabrications. And I'm coming up to these conclusions without knowing the full facts and whatever the case may be. And so, yeah. Dun, 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 dun. All right, so I think this is important. Let's see. Alexander Dugin is Vladimir Putin's ideological architect, the Russian philosopher who spent 30 years arguing that American global dominance must be shattered through Uranian. I don't even know what that word is. A Russia, China, Iran axis that fragments the Western liberal order. Okay, his framework has 4 pillars. Tucker hit all 4 on March 4th. Okay, very interesting. Pillar 1. America is fighting other people's wars. Tucker spent the broadcast opening constructing the argument that the United States is decaying empire manipulated by Israel and its domestic proxies. Dugin's writing is explicit that Americans must be convinced their military serves foreign interests, not their own, in order to break the political will to project power abroad. Obviously, in the video we just watched before that, Coleman Hughes and that other guy, Mark, I believe his name was, clearly debunked that. It's actually in America's best interest to destroy and topple Iran, especially their very immense weapon capabilities, apparently. And then we have pillar number 2. The war is secretly religious, irrational, and apocalyptic. Tucker's entire theological monologue, Solomon's Temple, the Foundation Stone, Third Temple mysticism, was designed to make the Iran war feel like a crusade launched by fanatics rather than a strategic decision by a government. Very important to understand that. Dugan frames Western liberalism as spiritually empty civilization being destroyed by its own nihilism, positioning American military action as secret religious zealotry serves this frame precisely. Very interesting. Very interesting article here. Again, you can find the full thing on X. I haven't read the full thing, but I'm going through some of the pieces here, especially this Dugan philosophy about how Tucker Carlson is essentially manipulating and fabricating everything he says and the audience that listens to him, which is very, very, very large. Pillar number 3, China and Russia are natural counterbalance, not aggressors. That's insane. Tucker opened the broadcast declaring that China is America's peer, almost no matter how you measure it, a claim that is false by nominal GDP and by a measure of combat experienced expeditionary military capability, but which serves the Duginist project of legitimizing the multipolar order as inevitable rather than manufactured. That's a lot of fucking words right there. Tucker Carlson is not a national treasure. Tucker Carlson is a liar, a fake, and he's paid by someone because he's too smart to just be lying straight out of his ass. And so he's using these tactics to manipulate his audience in a very skilled way. That's why I think this X article is very well written. And then pillar number 4, American soldiers are dying for nothing. On March 4th, the broadcast emotional core, the through line, Tucker returned again and again, is that the troops in CENTCON are being expended to fulfill a billionaire religious fantasy while the Pentagon runs out of missiles. Tucker treated that as an established fact. The goal is not to inform. The goal is to make an American service member family feel their loved one is being sacrificed for nothing. The single most powerful demobilization message that exists. Very interesting. Let's see what else we got going on here. Tucker Carlson on March 4, 2026, told his audience 6 things that primary source analysis cannot support. He told them that the Third Temple is real, war aim of the U.S., and the destruction in this war is likely. That is a false flag, and it's probably coming. That the U.S. military days from running out weapons and the controls American government, and the American troops are dying for Israel. Every one of these conclusions serves as a single strategic purpose to break American political will during an active military operation in a manner that benefits the Russia-China-Iran axis Dugin has spent his career constructing. So that's what Tucker Carlson is doing. He is running cover for the Russia-China-Iran axis, all of the rogue states whose sole goal is to destroy America and Western civilization. And so if you think Tucker Carlson is spilling the truth and sharing some fucking national treasure about shit, you're wrong and misinformed. And you should take a deep dive into that and potentially have a little more discernment about who you trust and who you follow, considering if you follow people like Tucker or Candace or Ian Carroll or people who have all these large followings on the right, they're misinforming you because they're sort of been, their mind has been sort of warped by this like Israel Jew derangement syndrome. And then she cites her work here at the bottom. And what he said about Chabad is that it's basically Chabad's fault that they're starting this war is a threat, is sort of an open invitation for people to attack Jewish people and people who go to Chabad. It's actually very disgusting and super disingenuous. Let's see. What Tucker Carlson actually believes, insofar as he believes anything, is that America deserves what's coming. A useful idiot at least believes the propaganda. Tucker just sells it. Let's see what the Chabad thing is. See if we can find where that was. Here we go. This is important to understand. The FBI recorded 1,938 single bias hate crimes against Jews in 2024, the highest number since the Bureau began collecting data in 1991, a 5.8% increase from the prior year. Since January 2020, the ADL has documented 19 terrorist plots or attacks targeting Jews or Jewish institutions in the U.S. 12 of those occurred between July 2024 and January 2026, more in 18 months than the previous 54 combined. Incidents at campus Chabad centers more than doubled year over year. And Tucker Carlson has the audacity to say that it's Chabad who started the war. He is completely off of his rockers. But like I said at the very beginning, like she said at the very beginning, Tucker is too smart to make things up wholesale. And so he selects sort of real facts, like we stated about the IDF patches, and then uses those to form his whole conclusions, which are completely fabricated and made up, and then tells it with such seems like such sincerity because he has so much broadcasting experience that his charisma comes off as like fucking charming or whatever. And he tries to come off as like this family man, Christian person who's just like asking questions and trying to get to the truth and helping the American people. It's all under that guise of unearned moral virtue. It's under the guise of like, he's the paragon of virtue. He knows. And then he's blessing you with this information, and it's all bullshit. He's a gaslighter. He's a manipulator. He's a half-truther like Candace Owens, and it is causing real division and real harm in American society, and it's not good for the future of media consumption, for the attention economy, about how we get the correct information to accurately decide about what's going on in our society and how we can make the best possible society moving forward. And so again, I urge you to check out this article. It's on X. I'll link it in the description below. She does cite her her sources. You can check out the Tucker Carlson broadcast from March 4th. I'm sure you have. Millions of people watch it. And you can kind of pick out the points where he uses those sort of, she says, what's the guy's name? Alexander Dugin's pillars, 4 pillars of the Russia, China, Iran axis to sort of dismantle America and Western civilization. So extremely important. Let's stop sharing there. Get back here. And I think that's the stream for tonight. The first part of the stream kind of got messed up because the internet. So we started somewhere in the middle with that Coleman Hughes conversation, which is a good chat. And then we used that X article to kind of debunk Tucker Carlson and the way he expresses himself in a very manipulative and gaslighting way. There's also an article on X somewhere where someone breaks down like all 36 lies that Tucker Carlson stated in his quote unquote interview with Mike Huckabee, and that he intervened and talked over him and interrupted him like 500 times. Just like really inappropriate, bad stuff, and not good for the fabric of our society and the flourishing of our society. So if this is your first time on my stream, I stream often, 4 or 5 times a week, sometimes mindset, sometimes mental health, sometimes current events, sometimes sports. So please, if you're here right now, subscribe, follow, and join me on the next stream. And then please, please, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.